This is Cécile and Olivier.
Hello.
Hello.
A couple of French artists who make comic books, video games, and what we're most interested in today, watercolour illustrations. They had an opportunity a few years back to live in Niigata, and during that time they did lots of sketches and they really fell in love with Japan, and it became inspiration and the setting for most of their work moving forward from then. After they returned to France, they began in earnest to work together. They published their first book in 2016. They were also doing lots of lino cut work at the time, which is how they learnt about Jed Henry and the work he was doing with Mokuhankan. In 2018, they had a chance to come to Japan again, and one of their first stops was Mokuhankan, where they had a chance to meet Dave, and very quickly actually the idea of a collaboration was put on the table. It was not possible at the time, but here we are on the cusp of 2025, the stars have aligned, and we're ready to undertake a full subscription series in earnest with them. That'll be 12 prints, starting from January, releasing one print every month. Beautiful handmade woodblock prints.
Atelier Sento.
I'll be getting into the image and the concept a little bit later, but to get us started, here is Olivier inking the very first image. Atelier Sento made their initial composition sketches digitally, and then to get really nice tasty lines, they did the final draft by hand with brush pens. I'm so happy about this. As someone who spends most of their waking hours staring at lines, the difference this final step makes really can't be overstated. This is the reason that last year's series with Hokusai's very own brushed lines was so much fun. Brush is king. Even before I became a carver, the way different artists make marks is what really tickled my art itch. You can tell so much about an artist through their line work. And while Atelier Sento work in watercolour mostly, usually thought to be a really loose medium, you can see that actually they're very particular and very precise in the way they work. Even without seeing this footage and just looking at the lines, you can sort of tell that. I think it's a really good combination for them, a really precise personality mixing with quite a loose medium. So with the design in hand, I get to pasting the image down. This is the first key block for the image. There are two. One will be dark and one will be in a slightly lighter blue tone for objects in the distance. This first one I'm beginning with has all the foreground information. Before I got carving, Dave and I sat down and had a discussion about the image, and to really make some important decisions. The first print sets the parameters for all the following prints. So we looked at the brushwork, we looked at the borders, we looked at the depth of colours, the number of blocks. Dave made it a non-negotiable that this series would be handbrushed. And while Atelier Sento are very competent illustrators and watercolourists, they don't have much experience with Japanese brushing painting. So after they submitted the first image, we noticed that the leaves of the bamboo, they were in the foreground and at the top of the print, and they would be quite dark if we left them as thick as they were here. So I touched up a few of the lines around the bamboo, but the rest of the lines we left the same. I kept much of their taste in the brushwork, I just tapered and thinned some areas. Another important decision was with the borders, to make them rulered or introduce some brush variation. In very broad strokes, ukiyo-e images usually have ruled mechanical borders, and very often you'll see in Shinhanga works, these borders are usually hand brushed and much rougher. As Atelier Sento are known for their watercolour paintings, we decided that the rougher borders would be more fitting for the series, so I went ahead and did that. The clearing proceeds as I've outlined in previous videos, starting by clearing around the lines with large U-gouges before moving to wider, flatter chisels. The last step in the clearing are cleaning out any ridge lines between where the U-gouge and the flat chisels met, and then lastly the ice-ski. I'm really not sure exactly how to strike a balance between the technical stuff and the overall just interest in printmaking, you know. I don't want these to become lectures on printmaking. That being said, I know there are printmakers out there. I've seen lots of people implementing some of the things I've said and talked about in previous videos. And an area you have to be careful with when clearing close to the lines with the ice-ski. These are the small bullnose chisels I'm using here, is where lines are going perpendicular to the grain. These break much easier than parallel or diagonal lines. So printmakers out there, be warned, on very thin lines, this is where they'll pop. So here is the first key block all washed up and ready to print. So once the key is carved, I then have to make a second key block. The second key interacts with a lot of the lines in the first key. So it's really important I line them up. There's a couple of ways and a few different methods of ensuring that the second key lines will match perfectly with the first ones. I went with a technique where I printed out the second keyline informations on a standard printer and cut the registration very carefully and printed the new key block on top of that. The other way to do this would be take a very thin sheet of Gampi and print out the lines on a printer and place that on top. The trouble with doing it the second method is that after pasting it to the woodblock, you do lose the information of the original keyed lines. So I think I made the right choice. This was the best way to do it. One of the most frequent questions I'm asked about is about not turning the block when I carve. I do have a future video planned about this, so I won't go into it here, but it's really a surprisingly rich topic. But you see here that there are times where I do turn the block, and it's only for particular areas like this where the lines are running vertically in the image. So I asked Cecile and Olivier what was their concept for the series, what was their inspiration and their intention for this set. And this is what they told me. Because it was supposed to be a series of 12 prints, we were looking for a concept that would be rich enough to keep us motivated all the way along. Also, we didn't want it to be too similar to our previous works, so we had the idea to mix our usual nostalgic view of Japan with elements of science fiction. NASA had a similar project a few years ago, a series of old-fashioned posters picturing space exploration as if it was done in the early 20th century. Past and future worked well when mixed together, and we hope that people will be as excited as us to travel this retro-futuristic vision of Japan. The set they were referring to is this one here. These are a couple of my favourites from that series. I think it's a really interesting concept and there's so much potential here. I love this nostalgic view of Japan, and I think the sci-fi twist on them gives them so much freedom to be really creative here. I've seen sketches of the initial concepts and I'm really excited to see them fleshed out. There's no specific time period set for this concept, like Japan 200 years in the future. The series will jump around loosely about this concept. Then I needed to make transfers for the colours. It's really critical I register these properly. As there are 2 key blocks, any misregistration could mean that the new blocks will be carved incorrectly, and at that point there's no saving them, there's no shaving or adding little bits. It would have to be recarved again. So before I get to making the colour transfers, I check the transfer sheets really carefully, one by one. We have 6 colours to go with 2 keys. A blue shadow tone, some red for the parasol and kimono, a brown for the fence and for the kimono patterns, base green for the bamboo, a lighter shadow block, a sky block, which will have 2 big tone gradations on. It will also be creating some more depth in the bamboos. For colours that weren't outlined by either of the key lines, I traced them first with a pencil, and then I refined the tracing by looking at the sample with a fine liner. I think this fine liner is a 0.03, so it's a really fine one. I then colour all the areas I want to remain in the colour block. Anything uncoloured will be removed when carving this block. There are some kimono patterns also that I could have drawn, but I decided to paste them with a thin sheet of gampi right on top. This way I can work straight from their drawing rather than my tracing, and it's more accurate. The reason I decided to paste them is because there are several colours used here to create the final kimono pattern, and none of them have outlines. So precision is key here. So I printed them out on gampi, cut them carefully, adhered them on top of the transfer sheet, and then I used the light box to check that the registration was correct and everything was going to be lined up perfectly. So several fail-safes to get everything right here. So here we are with the finished colour separation sheets, ready for pasting and carving. So really quickly, I thought I'd just explain how I cut the lines on colour blocks. I don't actually want to line up my cuts exactly on the edge of the black, because that'll mean it's really difficult to register for the printers. So what I usually do on thinner lines, we divide it down the centre. On slightly thicker lines, you don't need to go all the way to the centre, you just need to take it so there's a decent overlap, maybe like 0.5 mil to 1 mil, depending on how thick the lines are. So what we do is we split it down the centre. We don't want to carve on the outside here because we could get colour coming into this blank space. We don't want to carve on this side here because we might get white lines if the registrations are not pinpoint accurate. So what we do is we split it down the middle. On the borders where there's thicker lines, we don't really need to go all the way to the centre of the line. So what I do is just step in a little bit and I cut along here. Just so there's enough of an overlap. Maybe you can see it more clearly if I carve this out. I could take it more in, maybe something like this. Between those two. The colours that aren't defined by borders like these kimono patterns, I paste down the transfer and I carve them just like I would a key block, carving exactly on the lines, rather than the way I was just explaining now, cutting down the centre of the line, for obvious reasons. Now, I won't bore you and make you sit through all the colour blocks in as much details as I did with the keys, but here are some of the highlights from making the 6 colour blocks. In general, once the colour blocks are pasted down, it's simple work. There are timestamps if you want to skip any quiet carving areas. I think in future videos this is probably how I'll use my music, just like I did in this video. Some people really like the music, and others feel really strongly negatively about it. The quiet carving portions will have some jazzy piano, and you can consume these videos as your preference dictates. Best practice for when clearing is to work down in size. A real master carver will start with a very large chisel and work their way down in sizes, and they'll never go back up, gradually coming down until they finish with the very smallest pick chisels. That's the theory anyway. In reality, there's no one on the planet who adheres to this 100%. We all jump back and forth a little bit. But that's sort of the gold standard the truest craft people work to. It's a good ideal to aim for. The previous videos I've made for my YouTube maybe skew the perception of how long these prints take to make. I think I said something like 6 months for the Nico, and the Hokusai print took at least 2. This one, in contrast, I banged out in about 10 days. 3 days on the knife work, a day and a half extra to clear the key. Making the second key was less than a day, and then the other colour blocks were 4 or 5 days. So on smaller designs like this, it's a really efficient process. And here's the finished block set. After this, I sent them over to Mokuhankan to await test printing. And actually, Dave will be printing the first run of this, so we're all waiting on Dave now. So now we get to the printing. As I said, Dave will be making the first batch. He was very generous and gave me some footage of him doing the test printing on this.
This is all going to be just testing, testing, testing.
The colours you'll see here will change a little bit in the final design. Usually prints go through a couple rounds of testing before they're ready for prime time. I won't talk much during this. There's about 3 or 4 minutes here of quiet Dave printing. I'll jump back in the end and show you the final print.
It's like riding a bicycle. You kind of, you can kind of still do it. Do I have the physical power to make 200 sheets in the next 2 weeks? We're about to find out.
I think he'll be alright. If you did like that last segment, then Dave, I believe, will be putting out a longer version of the full printing process, start to finish, in real time. So keep your eyes out for that. But for now, would you like to see the print? Testing went well, and Dave is now working his way through a thick stack of paper, getting all the prints ready to send out in January. This image eases us into the concept that Atelier Sento laid out, and I myself am very happy with how it turned out. A nice, vibrant image to send us off into the new year. Hopefully, 2025 will be as peaceful and pleasant as this little image here. I can't guarantee how it will go, but what I can say is that if you end up signing up for the subscription, that each month a pleasant little image like this will arrive at your house with a print in a similar theme and similar style to this one. The link is in the description and should go live very shortly. If you enjoy the work that Atelier Sento do, I've put links to their website and their Patreon down below. They are really active, they're producing so much stuff each month, and I highly suggest it. Me myself, I got to get back to do some more carving, but I wish you all the very best in 2025 and have a lovely holiday. More to come soon. Happy carving. Peace.